So, what am I doing here today, and why am I giving this presentation? Phones are ubiquitous. We all know that. But I also think they're limited in a way that there's oftentimes things we need to do with our phones, when our hands are busy or when our eyes are busy. For instance, imagine yourself cooking something and you have a recipe on your recipe application and you want to know how much of certain ingredients go in, what's the next step in the cooking process. You want to be able to do that without having to use your dirty hands while you're cooking, right? Well, it would be cool if you could say, what's next? Or how much of flour goes into my recipe? And so on. Or imagine a situation when you're driving and listening to a radio application, and then there's commercials that you don't want to hear. You don't want to distract your eyes off the road and your hands off the steering wheel in order to switch for the next channel. You want to be able to say, hey, switch the next channel, and then your app switches the channel by itself. So the topic of my conversation is really about how to enable voice interaction in your application. I think there is a lot of potential for many apps, in fact for most of the apps, to use voice interaction to facilitate the user experience, to make the apps better, and to make them more usable in different scenarios, not just when the user is one-on-one with their phones. For that, there is this tool that I recently discovered for myself. It's called API.AI, Artificial Intelligence Tool. It's just one of those available, but it's pretty handy. So if you want to enable voice interaction in your own application, there is simply 2 steps that you need to do. It's to create your own artificial intelligence agent and to integrate it in your application. Therefore, the first part of my conversation will be about creating an artificial intelligence agent, and the second part of my presentation will be about integrating it in your app. Okay. So what is API.AI? As I mentioned, it is one of the tools that you can use to create an API agent, an API.AI agent. There is a handy diagram that is available on the API.AI website, and I'm going to use it to briefly explain to you how it works. There is an API.AI platform. It takes in a query that's been submitted by a user, and it returns to us a response. The query comes from an API bot or an agent. The query can be received either via a keyboard input or a voice input, and it will return back to us in the form of the JSON. The bot that we are going to be building receives this query in a human format from a user. So that can be your application, that can be a Google Assistant, that can be wherever. Optionally, we can also use a webhook. So before we get this query returned to us, we can submit a webhook, and the query gets enriched via our, for example, cloud application and comes back to us enriched. So let's focus on this part, the user part. It's more of a question, where can API.AI be used? Here I took a screenshot of all the of the tools, of the applications where we can simply enable API.AI, and it will be available. For example, Actions on Google, that's for your Google Assistant. If you have a bot, you can enable it through API.AI on Actions on Google, and it will be available. You'd later need to publish it, and or you can just use your developer application in developer mode and work with that. It's also available for Amazon Alexa, and I love it how they put it at the very end, like it almost doesn't matter. And it's also available on Slack and a bunch of others. Also, API.AI can be made available to your own application if you use an SDK that matches one of the tools that you work with. So it is available on Android, it It's available on iOS for iOS applications, JavaScript, if anyone's interested, for Unity applications, and more. I'm going to give you an example of an API.AI agent based on my own application. My own application is called Studio Navigator. Let me give you a brief background about it. I have a studio that I want to be able to rent out on Airbnb. And when my guests on Airbnb will be staying at my studio, I want them to be able to easily find things in my place, such as where the bed sheets are located, where the tables, where the plates are located, the silverware, and so on. Therefore, I build an app that whom they can ask different things about my studio to make their stay more pleasant. And we're going to use it as an example here for this presentation. So first thing you need to do, as I mentioned, is to create an API.AI agent. For that, step one is to go onto the API.AI website and create an account. Easy enough. Then, once you're in there, you go to the console and create a project. To create a project, you simply start your first project, provide a name for it, provide a description, and then language, anything else you want, and it will be available. Later on, I will also point your attention to the API keys that are available for your particular application because we will need it for the integration, but that's a little bit further. For now, let's stay focused on the tabs that are available on the left. We are particularly interested in intents, entities, integrations, a little bit of training, fulfillment, and for now, that's it for the purpose of this presentation. Step two, actually, when you're creating your own API.AI agent is to define entities. Entities is essentially like objects in object-oriented world. So you need to determine what entities will your agent be operating with. What is it? What type of input you're expecting from your users, right? To give you an example, well, we'll dive into examples later, but first thing you need to know is there are three types of entities: system entities, developer-defined entities, and user-defined entities. System entities are already there for you by API, provided by API.AI. They are, for example, date, currency, something that's predefined, that's very, very common. You don't need to redefine it yourself. That would be considered a bad practice. Then developer-defined entities are those that you create customly, specifically for your application, for your agent. And user-defined, I can say that you don't need to bother about them. They are specific to one specific application or one user, and they get generated sort of in runtime based on the input that that user provides. So entities. Based on the example of my app that I gave you, my entities are bedware, cookware, silverware, supplies, tableware. They're defined right here. So when I go on the tab entities, I create a new entity and I can see the list of my existing entities here. Once I click on a specific entity or when I go to create a new entity. So here I'm creating an entity called supplies. I'm going to define different versions of supplies. In other words, what types of supplies can there be? So my entity supplies can be represented by cleaning supplies, laundry supplies, paper towels, office supplies, paper, I don't know why, whatever. Now, please pay attention to these two checkboxes right here. The first one is define synonyms. You can disable it or enable it. If you enable it, you are also able to provide for each type any synonyms, because many people can name one thing in different ways. Suppose I want a cleaning supply, but what if I want specifically a dishwashing liquid? Then I will say I want to find a dishwashing liquid. So it's in your best interest to define as many synonyms as possible for one given entity. Additionally, you can also check to enable automated expansion. That means that when a user mentions something that's very similar to what you already have, but you haven't specified just that, using all the base of knowledge that API.AI already has, they will try to match the unknown variable to the structure that you have already defined. For that, please enable the Allow Automated Expansion checkbox. You can also add a new row and add as many more as you wish. And I also want to give you a little tip. Don't forget to hit the save button at anything you do. That's the mistake that I've been doing all the time. I keep forgetting to press the save button, and then stuff that I enter doesn't save, and then I can figure out why it doesn't work. So now that we have defined our own entities, we can go ahead and create intents. I cannot define an intent better than the guys at the API.AI have defined the word intent within the platform, meaning it's a mapping between what a user says and what action should be taken by your software. Probably it's easier to understand by an example. I have two examples, one simple and one a little bit more complicated, but it will give you a flavor of what intents are. Simple one. An intent can be to find bedware, meaning I want to find bed sheets, covers, blankets, pillowcases, and so on. So whenever the user is trying to find bedware or any of the synonyms that I have defined, it will give me an answer of where it is. You also kind of provide your own answer below, right here. So essentially you want to be able to enter all the possible ways that the user can ask a question, and then also provide an answer for the right answer for that question that the user has asked. Important thing is, the more versions of the question you define, the easier it will be for the platform to determine what your query was, because it takes that question and parses it into a query that it can later provide you a response with. So suppose you entered where are the blankets, like my example right here. Then I want to select this word blanket, which is exactly the variable that I'm interested in. And you highlight it and you specify that this variable represents bedding. So now it has detected that this query will contain a bedding variable. And every example that I have provided will also contain this variable that I'm looking for. So now API.AI knows how to look for that variable. And as I mentioned, you have to also provide the response, because it will be taking the response from the ones you have provided. And they have to be also quite similar, but it's also nice to provide at least 2 or 3 different responses, because that way, every time a user asks a similar question, it won't be just answering the same thing over and over again. It will be answering it randomly out of the text responses that you have provided. And hit the save button. Don't forget to. Next is an example number 2. Find supplies. In that case, I already gave you an example of supplies when we were creating the entities. And suppose a user wants to find supplies. We again define that papers and pencil is the supplies that the user is looking for. I highlight them, and it automatically gets put in the variables table, right? Now please pay attention. I'm not sure if you can see well here. There is a checkbox for a particular parameter being required or not. When I checkbox it as a required parameter, it will make sure that each query the user submits contains this parameter. If it doesn't, it will prompt for this parameter for the user to enter. So suppose the user says, I want to find supplies. And in my house, supplies are located in different places. So I want to know what exactly supplies are required. So if the user hasn't provided what they are, it will prompt the user to provide the exact names for the supplies. So for that, again, I checkbox it as a required parameter. And then there will be this prompts column where you want to type in a prompt. So it pops up a dialog, and you also type up your own prompt. What types of supplies are you looking for? So in my example, if the user will be looking for supplies but will not provide exact supplies, it will prompt the user what exactly supplies are you looking for? and then wait until the user actually provides the right ones. I also want to point your attention to this list variable. To this list column. You can mark a particular variable as list, and that means that a user may be looking for multiple of this. So this variable is actually can be a list, right? On the right of this tool, there is it's like a simulator of the queries. Make sure you test your agent as much as possible. This is helpful for you to check that this is working correctly, but this is also helpful for your agent because it's learning. The more queries you play with it and enter, the more different they are, the better it learns to understand how to answer your questions correctly. So in the example right here, I entered, I want to find the supplies, and the user has entered what types of supplies are you looking for. Actually, the agent responded, what types of supplies you're looking for, and then the user will enter the correct answer. Can you see this text right here, or is it hard to see? Not so much. Okay, then you just have to believe me and then to try yourself, I guess. But I will briefly mention that this every time you have a conversation, it creates a context of the conversation. So this is one dialogue. It's not just a query and a response. The next question from your agent and the next answer build up in one context, and it is aware of a context. So also when you're testing and you want to try a particularly different intent, be sure to reset the context, because it will think that you are still trying to proceed with the same conversation. At the same time, if you want to build up a long conversation, this is particularly useful, and continue developing also using these context variables. All right? Optionally, for example, in the second example that I gave you, I won't be able just using API.AI to provide the correct answer where each of my supplies are located. Therefore, you want to provide a webhook which processes these parameters and provides the correct answer. So you want to be able to provide like some sort of cloud solution which will be accepting your webhook. I actually am not planning to cover the webhooks today. My purpose is also to explain you briefly how to integrate it in using, as an example, Android SDK. But before I proceed to the part 2, I cannot emphasize how important it is to train your agent. The more you train it and the more diverse you try to pose the questions that are going to match your given queries, the better your agent is going to work. So train, and again train your agent if you want it to do the job correctly. And there was some sort of example. I also wanted to mention that, I wanted to provide an example of a response, how after all these queries have been submitted, the API.AI provides us a response that is put together in a one neat JSON file. It has a timestamp. It actually also has our input that we have provided to it. It will tell us exactly what the user has said, which is convenient for the developer to troubleshoot later. It contains the resolved query. My query name was where are the bedsheet covers, and that's what it figured out. And it extracts the parameters from it. In that case, it's blankets. So the question was, well, I don't know actually what it is. I already forgot. Lastly, step 2. We need to integrate the agent that is ready into our application. Remember, in the very beginning, I mentioned that there is a settings icon here, and when we go into the first page of our project, it will contain API keys, client access token and developer access token. Be sure to use them whenever you will be integrating it in your application. So, next. We don't need that. Not your agent. So now you have your tokens. Time to integrate it. let's integrate it in an Android application. There is a few steps to it. First, get the dependency, request the desired permission, configure it, init the API.AI service, implement the listening logic for the response, for the result, for the errors that may be incoming, and process the given result. And that's it. The dependencies you need are listed here. You can copy them or grab them later for my presentation. Then you need to request permission. There are only two permissions that are required for using API.AI. Those are internet and record audio. In order to record audio, you need to request this permission. Internet permission can be provided just in the manifest. That's it. Now you need to provide AI configuration. In the configuration block, this is exactly the place where you provide your access token. That's how OneSDK matches exactly the agent that you have created with your application. You also need to provide a language. I have to mention that one agent will be using one given language. For another language, you need to provide a completely different agent. And here you I provide a configuration for the English language with the token of the agent that I have just demonstrated to you. And also you can select a speech recognition engine. It can be the one from API.AI, it can be the inbuilt, in Android it can be the inbuilt text-to-speech recognition, just the speech recognition, and there is one more. There are three. That's it. Once you are equipped with the configuration file, you are ready to init the service. Well, you actually just have to call this AI service that gets service static method with context and the configuration that we have just created. And then you need to set a listener. I'm going to talk about the listener on the next slide. A listener implements the given methods on result, on error, on audio level changed, on listening started, on listening cancelled, on listening finished. An example of on result is provided here. On result, it returns us a AI response object that either contains an error or not. If there was no error, it contains the status, it contains the given query, the resolved query, the action that we have provided. We also can obtain the full speech that the user has submitted and more stuff. And then we do whatever we need, whatever we desire on this response. And lastly, when we are ready with all of that, we call AI service. So, for example, in an Android app, you can have a button. When the user wants to enter some query using their voice, they can press the button, or you can have a service that listens to some queries. But in order to start processing them, you have to call AI service that start listening so that it doesn't listen all the time. And then you also have some logic that determines when to stop listening. And also you can have logic that determines when to pause and resume listening and cancel. And I also wanted to mention that if anybody is interested and if anybody likes the idea of building their own agent, there is a Google Developer Challenge for your own AI agent that you can submit. And the prize for that is the ticket to Google I/O 2018. And that's it. Questions? Yes. It's completely free. Yes. I actually had a screenshot for that, but I didn't put it in. On their website says there is a pricing tab, you go on it and it says it's completely free.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, it was cool. The first question: do they have any limitations on the number of queries you can communicate with your AI?
Well, according to the documentation, there was no limit provided. I personally have never reached a limit, so my guess is that there is no limit.
Okay, and the second one, there's necessity in providing the context, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Is there any difference if you pass the not the activity but application context? Would it some effects or not?
I think it would be even better idea. Well, it depends on where you're using it. You know, you don't necessarily have to use it in an activity. You can also
I
use
know.
it.
Well, I mean, in general, for this service, is there any like constraints that you need to pass activity or?
No, there is no
Okay.
constraint.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions? Well, let me ask you this: has anybody also looked into AI before? Have you built anything so far? Okay.
Facebook.
Oh, that's cool.
Ah.
Which one, when you compared, which one did you find most comprehensive and most probably the smartest?
Well, the easiest to start is the one that Facebook did with AI. API.AI is one of the best, in my opinion, especially for prototyping and learning, because it's practically free, at least for now.
Is the one provided by Facebook free?
Yeah.
Okay, it's cool.
It can do less. The major feature that I found among competitors is that Google API, it has this feature of small talk. If there was actually this weird stream where two Google Home devices was set to each other and spoke.
Oh, that's right.
This is actually the small talk in action. So this is a unique feature of this NLP service. Regarding what is best, well, it depends. I find that it depends on the purpose of the project. For example, maybe Watson or Lewis will work better for big enterprise solutions because they can do more. They're more customizable, more powerful. But for small projects or prototyping, API.AI or VTI will do better because they're very simple.
Okay, that's cool.
And so on.
Pavel has a question.
I have two other questions that popped into my mind. The first one about the security.
Yeah.
Did you check when you were playing with the AI, did he send some data to Google or some other third-party services?
I didn't check. That's a good point.
Okay, and the second one, while playing with all these services, did you find any use case which is not a use case, I would say, but anything that you would like to change in the future from Google side? Like playing with it, you find out that something is not very good from your side, like negative sides. Did you find anything?
You mean how would I improve this platform?
Yeah, in general, maybe.
Well, at first I was quite annoyed that when I was entering, for example, where I was entering, where are the bed sheets, and it was telling me that the cups are in a cupboard, and it was talking about the tableware. I was quite annoyed, but then I realized that you have to clear the context. Remember, I mentioned the context part, and it's really important because I kept on typing, and in my mind I was typing a completely new query, and I had no way to tell the platform that, hey, this is incorrect, like I want you to better know what I'm asking you. But then I realized that I have to clear the context, so in a way maybe that should have been more straightforward on the one hand, but on the other hand I would have also added this way, like if I notice while training that something is wrong, I want to be able to tell it, hey, this is wrong, like don't do this anymore. Right now you only have a way to keep to keep training it and training it, but you don't have a way to tell it that this is wrong. The only way is to enter more and more possible user questions when you're creating the intents.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it? Well, then thank you for your attention and for listening.